Looking to make some healthier habits this holiday season? Make sure to check out our Moving Through Midlife community over on Facebook, as we are doing a Planksgiving event where we are doing daily plank workouts. We will be doing an Advent for healthy, happy hips this holiday season, and then also have a sugar challenge, a 2-week sugar challenge that you might be interested in. Happy holidays!
Welcome to Raising Healthy Humans, a podcast created for busy moms, where you can easily find info on health and wellness for your family. Join Courtney, a health coach, movement and posture specialist, and founder of FormFit, an active and supportive community where she helps busy moms move more. Here on Raising Healthy Humans podcast, she shares personal life experiences, training, knowledge, and conversations with other health and wellness experts so you can raise healthy humans.
Today, I'm speaking with Dr. Stephanie, a life coach who loves to garden and is sharing with us today some tips on gardening. She has found it very therapeutic and rewarding for her and her children, and hope that it will do the same for you. If you struggle with that green thumb, she is going to provide us with some tips to help us get started. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Hello, how are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good. So I wanted to have you on because you mentioned that gardening was a passion of yours. And I'd like to know, what got you started into gardening?
Well, my mother always had a garden growing up, and I remember as a young kid being sent out there to pick the vegetables for dinner. And she would have to send somebody out to follow me, because I would invariably sit down in front of the green beans and eat 4 green beans and put one in the basket. And so about 15 minutes after she sent me out, she'd have to send my older sister out to confirm that I was in fact picking green beans. But I was also eating them all. So I wasn't usually left alone in the garden very long, because I would just eat it all on my own. And so having such fond memories of the garden and picking the vegetables and everything else, I knew I wanted to do it with my kids. And I like to tell the story that I actually failed at gardening for probably the first 7 years.
Okay.
7 or 8 years, I totally failed at it. I had no idea what I was doing. And I remember when we moved into our current house, I was like, babe, we're going to do a garden and I want to do raised beds. And he looked at me and he said, if your garden fails this year, that's it. We're done. We're never gardening again. And that year we had so much produce that my 2 older kids had to set up a farm stand at the end of the road to sell the vegetables, because we couldn't eat them. We couldn't eat as many as we were producing. Yeah. But leading up to that, the 7 years prior to that, there were not enough vegetables to even make it into the house.
And did you use raised beds at that time, or you were using just the soil?
Yeah, so a number of different things, because we're military family. We lived in different places. So our first house was in Gulfport, Mississippi, and I thought, I'll just put it in the ground. It'll be fine. I knew nothing about gardening, so I just stuck stuff in the ground, and my dog was like, yeah, I'm going to eat all of that. And my dog ripped it all up. I never had anything to show for that garden. And that was 2 years in a row. I mean, it grew, but there was like nothing that you could pick off of it.
Okay.
And then we lived in Sicily, Italy.
Oh, wow.
Where it was warm, it was hot. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to put the garden in the shade of the trees so that my plants don't burn. Well, garden actually needs full sun. They don't like to grow in the shade. So that year didn't work. Failure, right? So the failure number 3. So the 4th year, we did put it in a spot where it got full sun. Well, my kids, my older 2 kids at the time, they were about 3 and 1, or 4 and 2 was about their ages. They would go into the garden themselves and just eat everything. So nothing made it into the house that year.
They were like you.
Yes. Yeah. So they would eat the tomatoes like it looked like an apple. They would just eat it right off the vine, and the green beans and everything else, right? So never made it into the house. And then our 5th year, we moved back to Virginia. And we had a tiny little yard. And I thought, this will be great. I'll have my tiny little garden here. It'll be perfect. And I put way too many plants in the tiny little space, and they all suffocated each other.
Okay.
And then the following year, I thought, okay, I'll just plant a few less plants and this will be fine. Well, we got a Great Dane, and she thought that it would be fun because she could just jump the garden fence. And so she would jump the garden fence and squish all of my little baby plants and think that it was hysterical and then jump back out. So that was, I think, failure number 6. And then the 7th year, we had this big, beautiful yard in our new house, and we're on like 3/4 of an acre. And so I had partitioned this one corner of the yard, and I thought, this is going to be great. I'm just going to put the plants right in the ground. Surely this will work out. Like, I've failed so many times, it has to work this time, right? I put them in the ground in the wettest part of the yard.
Oh, okay.
And we went away on vacation and came home, and all my plants had drowned.
Oh,
because that's where all the water just sat.
yeah. Yeah.
So year number 8, we did the raised beds, and then I started to really pay attention to the sun, the soil type, how plants were growing together, those kinds of things. But I had to fail several times along the way to figure it all out.
Okay. Well, and it's like anything else. You have to learn and experience and try to work through it to be able to be successful at it. Not everything comes right away in anything that we do.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And I want to get to the gardening, but I want to know, what does gardening do for you? What have you found out of your experience with gardening?
Absolutely. So I love, love, love gardening. And I think it's a great metaphor for life in general, because there is so much trust that's involved in gardening, right? So my little ones, I now have 4 kids. So my 8-year-old and my 5-year-old, we put the plants in the garden this past weekend. But we also planted seeds. And seeds are a trust test 1,000 times over, because you're like, I don't see anything happening. It's in the ground. Where are those little buggers? Like, are they going to come up? Are they not going to come up? Like, so even today, I mean, we're 3 days into the seeds being into the ground, and I walked out there today and I was like, well, nothing's coming up, but I know it takes longer than 3 days typically, right?
Right.
By like day 14, if something isn't up, then I'm like, okay, that seed is dead. I need to plant a new one. But it does require trust. And the same thing is true with anything that we start, because you're not going to see results in the first 3 days typically, right? Like, depending on what it is that you decided to do, it takes time for the thing to actually grow and for it to show up in your life. And a really great testament to that was we did asparagus years ago. And it actually takes 3 years for you to harvest asparagus, because the first couple of years, it will grow and it will sprout, but it tastes terrible.
Okay.
So it's year 3 that you can actually harvest the asparagus. Which was trying for my children, because they're like, Mom, we can pick it. And you're like, no, you don't want to eat that yet.
It's very time consuming with all of that.
Yes. I mean, and the same thing, with my flowers, I got a Christmas amaryllis 3 years ago. And the first year I just got leaves that came up. The second year, well, first, after the leaves came up, I had never grown an amaryllis before, and I thought I had killed it when the leaves died. And I was so sad, but I was like, you know what? I really like the pot that it's in. I'm just going to keep the pot. And then the following year, I glanced at it and it started to grow again. And I was like, holy crap, I didn't kill it. That's cool. But but then I just got leaves and I was like, shoot, did I get like a dud? Is this thing never going to bloom for me? Well, this year the leaves came up, and then one day I went to water it and I saw this little bud that had started to come up, and you would have thought I had won the lottery the way I responded. I grabbed the pot and I ran to my husband and I was like, babe, there's a bud. And he was like, there's a what? And I was like, it's actually going to bloom this year. And he was like, I don't see what you see. And I was like, see it, see it, see it. He's like, okay, that's really great. I'm happy for you, babe. But it took me 3 years, and it recently bloomed. I got 2 blooms off of it, and it was a beautiful thing,
wow.
and I loved it. But I really thought I killed it for a little while.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we have a banana tree. Well,
Mm.
if you have one, you have many banana
Yes.
trees. Um, and it flowered in, I would say, the fall, maybe, or would it have been the summer? I'm not sure when they flower, but it had flowered, and it took forever for them to become where they were ready for us to pull them off. It
Mhm.
was interesting. My husband's like, first, it took forever to flower. I think it's
Oh, yeah.
about 2 years of them, not from seed, but we replanted from someone else. And I
Mhm.
think it was 2 years. And then it finally flowered. And about 6 months later, we were finally
Yeah.
able to get the fruit off. So yeah, it's very interesting. And I would love to learn from you a little bit more about how to use these raised beds, because we live in Florida,
Mhm.
and very well, either you have very wet soil part of the
Mhm.
year, or it's very dry, hot, uh, not even really nutrient rich.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'd love to know, because I'd like to grow some more vegetables in our house,
Mhm.
outside our house. We don't have a ton of space, which is why I'm interested in the raised beds, because we don't have, you know,
Yeah.
acres of land.
Yeah.
So,
So in that instance, what you could do is you could actually do ladder beds where you could
okay,
have the flower pots basically put them in what looks like a ladder so that things
okay,
grow down would be a great way to start without a bunch of space. That's
okay,
a really good idea. And then what I typically recommend for people is that they start with a couple of pots,
okay,
because pots are a safe way to get started to see if you even like it without committing to raised beds.
okay,
Because one, you're not spending a crap ton of money on dirt to fill the raised beds,
okay, okay,
which in addition to also spending the money on the structure of the beds themselves. So we started with 8 raised beds, and my husband built the frames out of cedar plank fencing. So the
okay.
pickets for a cedar fence, he cut them to size and made 8 of them out of
Oh,
this.
wow. Okay.
They're actually really beautiful. They look really good when they're brand new. They look a little bit weathered now. But that was the start, and we were actually told initially to use fill dirt and compost. I will never tell anybody to use fill dirt ever,
Okay. Okay.
because it's crap soil and it comes to the top and it is nutrient poor.
Okay.
So they suggested it just to kind of give a base to the raised beds so that I wasn't spending so much money on the compost. But those beds are awful now. They're a pain in the butt to even work with, even
Oh,
after adding all the compost to it.
really?
So yeah, if you are struggling for space, I would recommend, maybe some bigger rocks or something.
Okay.
Um, but really, if you're putting the raised beds on the ground, the stuff that needs really deep roots can just go down into the ground anyways. It's not going to hurt anything.
Okay.
But we use mushroom compost.
Oh,
Really nutrient rich, really beneficial for the plants. And so we do that, and depending on the bed, so our beds are, I'm trying to do the dimensions of it. They're about 14 inches deep. And
Okay.
so we'll do about 8 inches deep of soil in each bed,
Oh, wow.
depending on
Okay.
what we're growing. The potatoes definitely way more dirt because they grow underneath and in the dirt. But the stuff that grows above the soil, you don't need really more than that.
Okay.
Yep. So what we did, what we figured out the hard way, was to find the area of your yard that gets the most sun, because your garden really does love the sun and they do really well in full sun. So I do have one bed that doesn't get as much sun as the rest of them, but that's for my lettuces, because the lettuce will fry if it gets too hot.
Yeah.
And so that's something to keep in mind. But everything else loves the sun and really
Okay.
needs the sun. And so that's what I generally tell people, is to just start to pay attention where the sun falls in your yard. Yes, it changes throughout the year, but typically you will have one area of your yard maybe that gets more sun than anything else. And that's really the best place to start putting things.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then when you mentioned compost soil, do you like make your own compost or do you purchase? I know you mentioned you purchase for the mushroom.
Yes. Yes. So we purchased the mushroom compost from a local garden store.
Okay.
You can also get it at your Lowe's or your Home Depot in a bag if you don't have a ton.
Okay.
If you don't need a lot of soil, you can get it in a bag. But because we get a ton of soil when we do it, and I don't mean an actual ton, but we get a couple of cubic yards, so we'll actually get it on the trailer and then put it into the flower beds
Okay.
for that. Yeah.
And then do you compost yourself or just to
We
keep
tried
going?
it. We did try it years ago and it was not super beneficial. So
Yeah.
it wasn't worth the effort for
Gotcha.
the smaller yard that we had. If we had, several acres, we would probably be more active in it. But we have chickens. And so I let my chickens roam the beds in the off season.
Okay.
And so they are able to poop in it, whatever, right? And
Right.
put other nutrients back into
Fertilize it.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that
Naturally
was a
fertilize
nicer way
it.
to say that. Yeah.
Quite all right.
Yeah.
Well, and are you in Virginia now?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay. Okay. Because I'm thinking of our Florida heat. It does, and I think that's why I've been so unsuccessful with my gardening is because it's just so hot here. Hot and
Yes.
dry. And like the potted plants, when you said start with the potted plants, they need to be watered like midday just because it gets so hot, they're dry as can be.
Hmm.
Or the summer where it's raining nonstop and they're then drowned.
Yes. And so what I like to do with my pots, because sometimes here in Virginia we'll have really wet times as
Uh-huh.
well, and I don't want my potted plants to drown either. And so about 2 or 3 inches above the bottom of the pot, I'll actually drill a hole that will let the excess water drain out, but the roots will still have access to that water below. So when I do the pots, I'll put in, depending on the size of the pot, I'll put in a few inches of stones.
Okay.
Above the stone level is where I'll drill that hole. And then I'll put in the potting soil, the compost, whatever it is, and then put the plant in. That way, one, you have the stones in there to help maintain where the pot is so it's not blowing away on you.
Right.
But it also keeps the water in there for those drier times. The plant's roots will eventually get down there and you'll be able to not worry about it drowning because it's got access to a drainage. Yeah.
Right. No, that's a good idea. And then what do you do? I've always wondered because you always see all these beautiful plants in pots, but then I feel like the plants become too big for the pot. So is there a way to maintain it to where they don't get too big and you can keep them in the pot forever? Or do you always have to then move it? Because then how do you do that? You have plants all, which is great if you have a ton of land, but if you don't, and you feel like you have to kill off these plants because you have nowhere to put them.
Yes, so it depends on the plant for
Okay.
sure.
Okay.
Because some plants, so I have some indoor plants that are viney, the Pathos. They're really great indoor plants. They don't need a huge pot because they vine everywhere. I literally have one crawling up my bookcase downstairs. So it doesn't need a huge pot for that instance, but I also have it's not a petunia, a pansy. I have a pansy that my daughter brought home for Mother's Day 4 years ago in a little like Mother's Day pot that she made at preschool kind of thing. And I put it in my bathroom and I was like, oh, it's so pretty. Like, and I know it's an annual, so it's gonna die. No, no, no. It loves my bathroom. And the thing is massive now. And I recently had to repot it into a much larger pot because the little pot, like this, right,
Uh-huh.
was tiny. It was in like a little 8 ounce pot, and I had to put it into like a 2 gallon pot because it just keeps growing.
Hmm.
It's massive. Like it's supposed to only be an annual, depending on
Right.
where you are. Like it's supposed to die off in the frost, but as a house plant, it loves the spot it is in my bathroom, and it is massive. And I will probably cry a lot if it ever dies. Um,
Oh. And then
so it
you had so
does,
you
yeah, it absolutely depends on the plant.
oh, with house plants, do you then also have a lot of house plants?
So I don't have as many house plants as I have outdoor plants, and that's
Okay.
mainly because of space.
Okay.
Um, I have way more space outside for plants than I do inside. And plus my kids are like notorious for knocking over a pot and soil going everywhere. Like the other night, I have a plant in my girls' bathroom, and my daughter came to me at like 9:30 at night, my 13-year-old, and she was like, Mom, I knocked over the plant. There's soil everywhere. And I was like,
Oh
I'm not
no.
cleaning it up. You figure it out. So one of the reasons I don't have a bunch of plants in my house, and I have them outside. So
Okay. Well, and you mentioned that your children help with all of this. Can you
yes.
talk like what have you noticed that they've gotten out of gardening?
Oh my God, they love it so much. And I have pictures of like my son when we first did the raised beds. I have pictures of my son like skipping out there with like the little pail to go pick the vegetables.
Aw.
And I love it. I love the time out there with them. And it's so fun for them to go out and be like, oh, this is fresh from the garden. Not to mention how different it tastes.
Mhm. Mhm.
I mean, if you've never had a homegrown watermelon, you are missing out on like the most divine thing in the world. They are just so sweet. Everything tastes so different when you actually grow it yourself. And I don't use any sort of pesticides or anything because my kids go out there and they just pick it right off the vine. So I'm
Okay.
certainly not going to spray it and be like, you can't go in the garden because I just sprayed for pests, right?
Right.
Defeats the purpose of having my own garden, I feel.
Yeah.
But I mean, having said that, it is an upkeep to grow it organically.
Mhm.
But when the kids go out there and they see, oh my God, there's little strawberries, or Mom, we get to pick a pepper, or you know, the snow peas that we grow. I've never had a snow pea actually make it into the house. Because my kids will go out there and they will just eat the snow peas right off the vine. They've never made it into the house. I don't think they're ever going to. But it's so fun for like my son who's 16. He'll go out there with my 5-year-old and be like, "Shh, don't tell Mom." And the two of them will just sit there and snack on the snow peas together. And I'll be like, "Did you bring any in?" He's like, "Oh no, sorry, they're all gone." Gee, thanks.
Well, and I think they appreciate things more. My daughter, she doesn't like bananas per se, but she ate these bananas and she said that they were pretty good. I think
Mm,
it was they're not quite as sweet as regular
mhm.
bananas, like commercialized bananas.
Yeah.
They were it had more of a sour. It wasn't that they weren't sweet, it was just it had a very different taste to it.
Hmm.
A soury sweet taste. Almost like when you think of a newly, like a just starting to ripe banana,
Okay.
but a little
Yeah.
bit sweeter, and the texture was more like a regular banana. If that makes sense. It was more
Yeah. Yeah.
tasted like it was greener, but still looked and felt
Yes,
more.
and sometimes the soil and even the temperatures can change the taste of that fruit or vegetable, right? So Brussels sprouts after a frost, they taste much sweeter.
Oh,
Oranges, for instance, when we lived in Sicily, blood oranges were very, very popular, but blood oranges came about after a frost where
okay.
the orange changed color because of the temperature. So those things will start to impact your fruit and how it tastes for sure.
Okay. So what would you recommend people like if they're interested in trying to garden, which I think every family should definitely at least try. Like you said, grab a potted plant. What would you recommend you start with if you're looking at, say, vegetables, trying to bring that into the home so that children are seeing and growing their own vegetables, hopefully being able to enjoy it. And I mean, I feel like for us, we have a place where we grow some lettuce,
Hmm.
and it made them more interested in
Yeah,
eating the lettuce.
yeah,
So, where would you start with a family who might be new to this?
yeah. So lettuce is a really easy one to start
Okay.
with. Lettuce or any kind of an herb. So I actually have a little herb garden that has like cilantro and parsley and sage, and I'm trying to think of all the other. I have a ton of them. Rosemary, chives. I've got a bunch of different herbs in there. That's a great one to start because you can start those in a pot
Okay.
and you can kind of cycle through it pretty quickly. So cilantro will grow and sprout very quickly, and so
Mhm.
you kind of have to be on top of that.
Yeah.
Um, but those are lettuces, certainly super easy to do. Um, I like to tell people to start something that they're going to use regularly.
Okay.
So peppers, if you're, big into bell peppers or jalapenos. We do a lot of jalapeno poppers during the summertime at my house, so jalapenos are a staple for sure. Bell peppers are incredible. They do like the heat. And so when we grow a lot of bell peppers, and was talking to a lady at the grocery store recently. She was like, "Oh, the bell peppers are on sale." She's like, "I really want to get them, but you can't freeze bell peppers." And I was like, "Yes, you can." And she was like, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, you just slice it up as if you were going to put it in a stir fry." I said, "Put it on a cookie sheet, put them in the freezer for a couple of hours. And then once they're hard enough, put them in a bag." I said, "And then you can use them for stir fries later on down the road." And she said, "Oh my gosh, what a great idea." And that's what we do because we typically, some years we have a really bad year for peppers.
Right.
Um, but there's been several years that we've had, I mean, hundreds of bell peppers. And I'll pick them, slice them, stick them in the freezer, and then we use them for unstuffed peppers and stir fries and whatever all year round, that I don't have to spend a boatload of money on peppers on the off season.
Okay.
Tomatoes are a good one too. Those are fun.
Mhm.
Um, I know some people are like, "Well, what about blueberries or raspberries?" You typically have to have two of those because they do cross pollinate.
Oh,
So
okay.
those fruit trees, the fruit bushes kinds of things, they're certainly something that you could start with in a pot, but you typically have to have a couple of them in order for them to pollinate.
Okay. Okay. Yes, and I was going to say, like with some of these things, like you're mentioning the peppers, how many plants are you having to grow to
Yeah.
get enough for your family?
Yes, so that's a great question as well. So I used to think that I had to stockpile my plants into the beds in order to get enough. But in my raised beds, which are 6 feet by 3 feet, in the dimensions of it, I put 3 tomato plants in there.
Oh,
And
okay.
yeah, and I have so many tomatoes coming out of my eyeballs that I am able to make homemade tomato sauce, pasta
Oh,
sauce, those
wow.
kinds of things. I do a
Okay.
lot of oven roasted potatoes during the summertime, and they are absolutely delicious. Same thing with cherry tomatoes. My cherry tomatoes just go out of control. to the point where I can't pick them fast enough because there are so many of them. Zucchini and summer squash is a big one that we do too. And usually 3 to 4 plants is plenty. Yeah, so you don't need a ton of plants. Peppers we do more of because I can freeze those for a longer period of time. I can freeze the zucchini and the squash, but I tend not to. And so for the peppers, I think I have 12 to 15 pepper plants right now, just because we do freeze them and we use a lot of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And can you put those in pots as well?
Yes.
Like, do they do well in pots?
Peppers will do well in pots. Zucchini plants will do well in pots. The thing about that is that you can get the bush version of it, where it won't necessarily vine out as much. And so the zucchini and the summer squash, we do the bush version. We also do watermelon and cantaloupe and honeydew melon and cucumbers. But those vinier things, they really have to have space to grow. Yes. So if you're okay with like not cutting your grass, you can put them in a pot. But they will, and even if you have a cage for them, they'll grow up and around the cage, and you'll be hunting for cucumbers or, whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because we have tomatoes that we grow out we have a tower garden, and we grow out and around on those. And it's crazy how much the vines go. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And it's it's definitely need a cage for those. Yeah. So, all right. Well, how can people find you if they're interested in learning more from you?
Absolutely. So Instagram is the best place to find me. I'm on there every day, whether it's in my stories or a post. And there'll be way more gardening posts coming through because it is now prime gardening season. And another thing that I like to add is if you are buying the plant, right, not starting from the seed, I do recommend that you find like a local farmer's market of some sort. And mainly because they're going to be using more locally sourced soil, which will allow your plants to actually adapt to your soil better, as opposed to, and this is no fault of Home Depot or Lowe's, right? But Home Depot and Lowe's, they generally don't have a local soil. They're, bringing in plants from other places. And so sometimes the soil doesn't translate well. And your plants will actually have a harder time growing in your own soil.
Oh, interesting. So would you then say grow from seed if you can't find someone local?
Yes. So seeds are usually, I don't typically start a whole lot of things from seeds like in the house, simply because I don't have the patience to get them outside appropriately. I tend to think that they'll be totally fine in the full sun, and then I fry them all. So if you're okay just sticking the seed in the soil and letting nature do its thing, that's a great place to start. But if you do want to buy plants, you can definitely check out like a local farmer's market or, something like that, where they will have closer to your soil. But you can certainly start things from seeds as long as you're okay being patient for it to take a little bit longer to come through. Yeah.
Okay. So maybe even like a local nursery would have more the soil. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Perfect. All right. So, and then if we have questions, we can reach out to you on Instagram.
Absolutely.
And you're happy to help us figure out.
Yes, I would love to answer all the gardening questions. Yeah.
Okay. Because I'm determined to try. I always go out, this is the best time to go out and grab your plants. And I always go out and I get all kinds of stuff. And I'm looking out and I've got a few things, and they're very sad right now. They're waiting for the rain to come because I'm not providing them enough.
Yes. Well, and another thing that you can do for that, because I hear this a lot, is, oh, I forgot about my plant. I will set an alarm on my phone, or like a daily reminder, like check the soil of your plant, like whatever it is. We're blessed to have an irrigation system. And so I can set that on automatic so that I know my garden's getting watered every day. But for my indoor house plants, like if I get a new plant, I have to remind myself, okay, hey, water the new plant because you just got it and it's not in your current routine.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So don't be ashamed of putting a reminder on your phone. Shoot, I have to put a reminder on my phone to remind me to go pick up my kids at the end of the day because I'll get so involved in something that I'll forget what time it is. And so I just leave the reminder on my phone, my watch, whatever it is, so that I'm not worried about missing my kids. Yeah. So, yeah.
All
Mom
right,
truth for you.
Okay, so if you could leave the listeners with one thing to help them get started this week on growing their garden, what would you recommend?
I would recommend just finding the fun in it. I am a big proponent of finding the joy in anything. And so just, have fun, like get a little packet of seeds and just see what it does. If it does nothing, okay, you haven't wasted any time, right? But
Right.
just, give it a try. I love to do little mini experiments. And so just see what happens. You might really enjoy being outside and tending to a plant and learning to trust the process of something growing. And you can see how it will, weave into other areas of your life. Plus, if you have your kids, they're more than happy to get their fingers dirty.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and like you mentioned at the beginning, really trusting that failing is not what we think of failing, it's learning. You did this 8 different times, and each time you were learning something on how to do it correctly.
Right.
Or
Yeah.
better.
Yes. Yeah. You can just narrow down all the things that are not working and you can find kind of the niche that is working. And it's the same is true in any area of your life. If it didn't work out that way, it wasn't supposed to work that way. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day for this.
Absolutely. It was so fun. And I look forward to all the gardening questions and all the pictures of all the gardens from here on.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thanks for taking the time out of your day to listen to our podcast. We hope you found this information valuable and can incorporate it into your family's life. Make sure to check out our show notes for all the important links available. Come join us on Facebook at Moms Raising Healthy Humans community page. Also, please check out our wide range of memberships, family monthly focus ideas, challenges, live events, and on-demand and live workouts, meal plans, and so much more. Head to formfitonline.com. And as always, keep moving.